Hi everybody, my name is Sophie Jupillat Posey. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. My short story, Full Integration, was accepted into this science fiction anthology. I'm super happy about it, and I can't wait for you to hear Delio Pera's rendition of it. So this anthology is available on Amazon. It was supervised and edited by Aditya Desmukh. There are more than 600 pages worth of stories, so quite a few authors contributed their stories to this anthology, which is pretty cool. So I met Delio Pera, my narrator, through ACX while we were working on another project of mine called The Sea. And he made such a good job with that I asked him to narrate this story. So I will discuss more of the inspiration behind this story, as well as both our respective bios at the end of this narration. So hang on tight and let's get ready to hear Full Integration. Thank you.
Full Integration by Sophie Jupillat Posey. Read by Delio Pera.
I stiffened as a slow pulsating beat called my desiccated, dying senses. A beat that I followed around the renovated Franz Liszt Academy of Music. I avoided the random groups of people, laughing or staring straight ahead, immersed in their interweb brain network, invisible to the naked eye. The pulsing was small, and I honed in on it, ignoring the almost alive feeling of the precious few old architectural buildings that hadn't been destroyed. I saw the backside of a little girl, her auburn hair down to her waist, a floral skirt brightening the dimness of this autumn day. I smoothly trailed behind her, her frame dwarfing mine. I made no sound, taking advantage of my evolutionarily cheated smaller body, not needing to crouch at all like I used to on my hunts 1,000 years ago. I finally felt like a predator again. It had been too long. When I was made in the 23rd century, I was one of the last to be bitten and one of the last to sire vampires. Afterwards, over centuries, my brothers, sisters, and fledglings all died. I was hanging on, but only just. I was the only one left that had turned. It still wasn't enough to survive the quickening evolution of humankind. They had evolved, but we hadn't. The death knell was struck. Humans have found a way to leave the barren earth and colonize the Milky Way permanently. I shall starve to death, the worst death for a creature like me. Complete disintegration. Even if I followed the humans, which I couldn't without some adaptive technology which wouldn't work with my body. For when I was turned, human bodies couldn't yet integrate with technology. I will not be able to feed on their blood. Just like the ability for vampirism to be passed down has become impossible because humans don't have blood anymore. The little girl paused and put her hands to her ears. A thrum emanated from her which I recognized as a reception of a message through the interweb network directly into her brain. I scanned around us. No parents, and no friends close to her. The few people present stood stock still, and that sound energy emanated from them too. Perfect. I dashed to the girl, put a hand over her mouth, and whisked her away to the top of the Meadows Hotel, my vampire instincts kicking in. The air folded around me and snapped like a clap, though I knew there was no sound that came with it. As soon as I released her, my head spun and a general tingly feeling prickled my entire body. My fangs erupted through my gums, tearing through shrunken, shriveled flesh. Hunger. At last, no more feeding on blood of rodents. Toxic, precious little blood anyway. My stomach clenched ferociously, pain racking my abdomen. My mouth shook with anticipation. Before the little girl could scream, I leapt on her and sank my teeth into her soft throat hard enough to pierce her voice box. She twitched violently, arms and knees flailing. My tongue curled as the artificiality of her blood struck, too late. But interspersed in the AI plasma was some actual human plasma still. So I drank as deep and as hard as I could, even though I knew the AI plasma would weaken my state and not satisfy my hunger. A little blood was better than none at all. I easily held her down as she continued her struggle. Her slate gray eyes widened and her pupils expanded as her body went limp. The beating of her heart stopped, and I was seized with curiosity. I punched through her ribcage and reached for her heart, and my spirit sank as I regarded the artificial heart's silicone walls, the size of a basketball and quite lifelike in my hand. It had fooled me. I'd known there had been complete artificial heart technology for a few decades now, but only adults had been able to enjoy the procedure that went into transplanting a heart that would keep them alive for 2 centuries minimum. Children were too young to undergo such a delicate, risky procedure, but the tech had improved, and I guess so had the consent laws regarding full artificial conscience transplant. And now I couldn't even feed on the children anymore. Feeding on children. I had promised myself many moons ago that I would never stoop to that. And yet, here I was. I had broken my own code. 1,000 years ago, I had been young and thought I was God. I'd fed on a pack of young refugee children and a pregnant woman. They were dying and alone. I hadn't needed all their blood, but once I'd killed one, I couldn't allow the others to live. The guilt stayed with me as my bloodlust lessened over the centuries. They could have survived. This girl I just killed could have survived. Her death barely served me. My hunger had hardly been touched. I touched the ring on my index finger with 6 notches in it. I brought it to my mouth and put 1 more notch in it. I willed myself down to the street level, which came easily thanks to the spurt of actual blood I'd gotten. I walked down the street, evading the ghosts of buildings that had used to exist, past the movie theater, past the beauty salons, past the restaurants, past the laundromat. In this world, none of these were necessary. People stayed home and enjoyed all of these with perfect bodies that didn't age or fail unless the tech itself did. The price to pay had been the consumption of all of Earth's resources. I came to the ferry and stared morosely at the Danube, its curlish gray surface reflecting the skylines, bobbing tranquilly to a rhythm only it knew. I jerked as a woman's voice floated to me, her high, fast-paced syllables tripping over each other to whoever she was talking to on her brain phone. I growled and glared at her, but she didn't see me. A bodysuit wrapped around her hourglass figure, and as she walked, it merged with her skin so perfectly she could have been made of that ultramarine blue material. Those bodysuits were typical of hospital workers and scientists. I tried tuning her out, but she kept talking more and more loudly. I was about to scare her with my vampire gaze, but she cut off my momentum as she said,
"Stop treating me like I'm a monster. I'm dying, okay? Whatever horrible things you think I've done, I'm paying for now. Happy?"
I couldn't hear the response. The tech didn't allow for that, but the woman, whose face was pasty and aged, something I hadn't seen in years, started sobbing.
"I will always love you. You're my daughter. If you could forgive me and see me just once, once before I go, you would make me happy.
A long silence ensued.
I will not stop. I will not stop doing what I do. I am dying, but I'm not an invalid.
Her mouth was set, her brow furrowed. I stared more attentively at her face. Something about that face, and maybe adding a few more pounds, taking away the lividness and the deep bags under her eyes, and darker, longer hair.
You've never understood my work. I don't expect you to now, but I'm not going to stop.
Snorting, the woman jerked her head and stopped talking. I had to gaze up to meet her baleful, wet stare. I raised my eyebrows. I knew who she was, and as her anger spiked because she deduced I'd been listening to her conversation, a familiar beat hypnotized and fed my hunger. She was Dr. Barbola Farkas, one of the most famous scientists of this era. Famous for her work with the human genome. The older she got, the more she was ostracized from the community for being anti-progressive. She did not endorse purely artificial improvements and man-made evolutional enhancements. It was strange seeing her out and about in such an intimate way. The beating of her heart called to me, and I leaned instinctively. I withdrew as I braced myself for the plausible eventuality that the beating I was feeling was synthetic. Strange that humans wanted to transplant themselves yet keep their original design.
What are you looking at? Mind your own business.
I cast my hand upward at her and hypnotized her to see if it would work. Her pupils dilated and her mouth slowly gaped open. I whisked myself to her side and bent her down. I smelled her neck. My fangs grew, that familiar pain stabbing through my gums. There was a pulse, and there was blood just under the surface. The scent of sick blood through fatigued plasma, but it was blood. I could not be mistaken twice in the same day. As I was about to plunge my fangs into her, I remembered an important detail. Her scientific work was all about evolution, specifically about manipulating the human genome to make it evolve more quickly. Unlike other scientists, she believed the best of the human genome lay in the past and the present times. She had supposedly found ways to make the genome integration and acceleration process happen, but no one was willing to have these ways tested on them. I'd read many conflicting articles about the scientific community's take on her. Perhaps she could help me. If she couldn't, I could will her to forget me, and I could go back to dying an excruciatingly slow death. I snapped my fingers, and her eyes focused again. By the time she was done blinking, I was standing a few feet away from her, arms crossed like nothing had happened. But her golf ball-sized eyes tracked me warily, and she softly said,
Are you a Pricolisi?
I chuckled and replied, A Pricolisi? Those haven't existed in centuries. You need more up-to-date folklore. I chuckled some more. Just because I was more hirsute than most and had thick features did not make me a Pricolisi. I did not even have a tail. Dr. Farkas hesitantly approached me, then stopped.
Then you are Strigoi.
She pointed at my mouth. I ran my tongue across my lips. My fangs were still out. They were out because I could still feel a pulse in her. There had to be real blood running in her veins, and that precious serum of life called seductively to my senses. No, I am not Strigoi. I didn't have the ginger hair, blue eyes, or 2 hearts for one. And like the Pricolisi, this Strigoi had died out sometime in the 24th century, and she mistakenly assumed I was Hungarian. I was from the long-forgotten state of Palestine. The tiny region forged between Palestine and Israel after centuries and centuries of conflict. I was bitten on the thumb by a vampire demoness, not even originally from the Middle East. I could still recall her accent, even if I had never seen her face. It had been a foreigner's accent, crisp with tall vowels. I did not know what kind of vampire I was. In the end, it did not matter. I was a vampire who'd survived, for now. You must help me if you can. I can persuade your fellow scientists that your work is valuable, but only if you keep me alive, I said, locking my eyes with hers.
What are you?
She whispered, curiosity and an almost eager look creeping onto her face. Not at all what I had expected. Just a vampire. You are dying, no? An anger flared in her eyes, quick and fierce, then it smoldered, giving her deep ocean eyes a savage tint.
Yes, I am dying.
I am dying too. I am the last of my kind, the last node. Believe me, I have searched everywhere. You are the only person who might be able to help me. She stared sideways at me like she couldn't believe me. The Danube River flowed blissfully on behind us in churning wavelets. I wished whoever had activated the autumn day mode in the climate regulator had chosen something else. This was ridiculous.
A vampire cannot die.
She turned away from me and stalked away, her ultramarine blue-clad form slowly disappearing from sight. That's what I thought too, I whispered to myself. An announcement came over the interweb network.
A new upgrade is available for individuals with artificial conscience transplanted bodies. Expect faster processing speeds, more acuity, more...
I tuned out and dove into the river to block out the incessant vocal reminder of what I could never be, artificially immortal. The doctor left me no other choice. I decided that night to track her down and make her see what I meant. I would have to use a technique I hadn't used in a long time, a form of hypnosis mixed with mind melding. I'd only used it for sexual encounters between other vampires and myself, rarely the stray human and myself. And now, for the first time, I would use it as a plea, and not a weapon. I tracked the scent of her blood, sickly, weak, but still pumping, due to the will of its owner, I was sure. She lived in the Turkish quarter, where the Turks had fled in the 22nd century after Europe bombed Turkey for its support of Muslim immigration. Rows and rows of pods lay in a sinuous line with the Turkish flag raised high. Flags from other countries decorated the doors of some of the pods. I recognized French, American, Vietnamese, and Russian. Some artificial gardens added a spice of color to the dusky backdrop of the night. Occasionally, I heard a dog bark or a child sing. 2 centuries ago, there would have been stark divides in the neighborhood, and the poor and the rich demarcation would have been obvious. But the access to all technological resources and the rebellions from scientific communities around the world had put a stop to global poverty, finally. So it was not surprising that Dr. Farkas would live in the same neighborhood of pods as a plumber or a teacher. People were proud of the professions they had. On the pods, they displayed holograms of themselves at their jobs working on projects that showcased their best moments. But I didn't need holograms to figure out where my scientist lived. My nostrils flared and the scent of her blood overshadowed the scent of wet dog, of plastic flowers, of alloy, and of rotting cloth. I reached her pod and let myself meld into a shadow that crept up and up to an open window where I slid through, and I let my corporeal body flesh out. I almost banged my legs on the toilet. Confusion filled me as the toilet, the shower, and the sink shone bright in the darkness. These were all old-fashioned amenities. Dr. Farkas may be an evolved human being, but she definitely did not embrace the augmentative tech. These days, humans had bowel parties where they pretended to urinate and defecate, since the augmentative technology and conscience transplanting had gotten rid of most natural body systems. Their bodies expelled waste like fluids and gave them the feeling that actual waste expelling would. I slipped out of the bathroom and glided to her bedroom, where I felt her deep, rhythmic breathing. And crouching next to her bed, I placed 2 fingers on her eyelids, and then I placed my other hand on her chest, right above her heart. I locked on her heartbeat and willed mine to sync with hers. She took a deep breath and almost woke up, but I willed her back to sleep, to deep comforts and childhood memories that made her smile. I connected with a memory of a severe-looking woman, aquiline nose, proud as she regaled tales of Sturgoi, which she still believed were around. Dr. Farkas as a little girl, wide-eyed, exhilarated, and scared at the same time, held on to every word. I explored that memory more deeply, as it led to a teenage Dr. Farkas going to the library with her class, immersed in a VR experience where she walked among dinosaurs of old, and then among the survivors of mass extinction, and then among the cavemen, her hawkish eyes swiveling as she focused on details that were passed from species to species, theories blooming in her mind. The seeds of her research lay in those recurring trips to the Hungarian Natural History Museum. Awe and determination washed over me, equaled by a nagging wave of disgust. Dr. Farkas shifted irritably in her sleep, and more of her thoughts traveled through me. Humans made of nothing but synthetic parts, perfect in appearance, almost immortal but still capable of dying. One little flaw in the tech was all it would take. One little flaw could kill the human race. The human genome was too complicated and too intrinsically ours to put in the hands of unfeeling technology. Waves of humans colonizing the galaxies, their thoughts as one synchronized mass without obstacles, without limitations. True immortality, a mental connection between all beings, no more loneliness, no more selfishness, no more weakness, collective power, complete eternity. I started pulling back, taking my hand off her chest and her eyes. These thoughts are not mine. If that was what she wanted, it meant death to me. I could not prey on a spiritus mundi of humanity. I am going to die, I thought. Immortality couldn't be a collective power. Vampiric immortality was the eternal quality of one soul, one powerful being using others to survive. Vampirism had no room for others. Even with each other, when my brethren were alive, we backstabbed each other all the time. We never formed communities. Even with our fledglings, we never supported each other, never trained each other. I couldn't remember their faces at all. What Dr. Farkas wanted was in direct opposition to what I needed. As the dread and panic seared through my senses, Dr. Farkas's eyes flickered and she murmured, "I'm going to die." Solitude and degradation until she was a husk of herself. No finished works, no lasting legacy of her existence besides a daughter who scorned her. She would be forgotten in history and have gotten no happiness from her time on earth. Dr. Farkas sat up with a gasp, and her huge eyes found me in the darkness. "You," she breathed, and strangely there was no fear. "I knew you'd come back." She smiled and swung her legs off the bed. "You can turn me," she said, licking her lips. "You can give me eternal life." I can't. I can give you a few extra centuries, maybe. Maybe a millennium at most, but your body won't keep up. I've lived 1,000 years and your species has surpassed mine. That is why all my brethren have died. That is why I am dying. I paced through her room, regretting having come. She was short-sighted after all. When would humans realize that vampirism was vastly overrated? They wanted eternity, but without the consequences that came with it. And Dr. Vargas cocked her head and got up, teetering a little bit as a wave of weakness washed through her.
You might very well be the missing piece. Yes, you are. I can finish my research. I can...
She continued excitedly, but scientific terms I couldn't discern kept derailing my comprehension, and so I disconnected mentally. When she was finished with her tirade, she swept by me and went to the back of her pod. I followed her, past a series of circular rooms that looked unlived in, until we went into a huge chamber filled with nothing but slots in the walls and a huge contraption in the middle. The contraption, this machine, was arrowhead-shaped and stood at about 7 feet tall, the size of an average human being. Rainbow shimmers cascaded on its sleek surface, creating amorphous shapes that dissipated as you watched more closely. Dr. Farkas turned towards me one of the sections of slots and pulled out one. A rectangular-shaped glass tablet the width of a sheet of paper sat in her hands. Her fingers covered most of it, but I could still see some fluorescent orange liquid rippling in the tablet. "What is that?" I asked as it cast a maniacal light on her tired features.
DNA sequences, Cas9, cRNA, and tracer RNA to help modify the sequences.
I looked at the sheer number of slots in the walls and pondered how many DNA strands could be harbored there.
This one,
she said, pointing to her tablet,
is part of my collection of prehistoric humanity's DNA. I have collected what I feel are the essentials for our next evolutionary step. Of some of the adaptations I have decided to keep from the Mesolithic and Neolithic age. For example, our endurance, our running ability, bigger teeth and jaws, our ability to maintain homeostasis, our ability to change the pigmentation of our skin according to climate. I accept that some of these traits we might not need on certain planets, but on planets that are close to the makeup of our Earth, those traits will be valuable.
You don't have just prehistoric DNA, do you? I asked, surveying the glowing slots in the walls. She smiled, her tiny teeth flashing.
I have every kind of DNA since. And now, with you, I can add vampiric DNA to the mix. That would give true immortality.
Her face lit up. Despite the wrinkles, the shadows, and the bruisings on her unnaturally white skin.
Fringe research indicates vampirism is a disease, but it is an organic disease that gives some pretty good adaptations organically. All this tech to choose perfect bodies, choosing superficial traits, in the end gives impermanent adaptations. We are messing with our evolutionary process and trusting the tech to work. All it takes is one flaw.
She snapped her finger and angrily thrust her tablet back in the wall. Have you tested your samples on anybody? Is there even a way to test if your samples will work? I ventured. Her face darkened and she glared venomously past me at the machine behind us.
I have never been able to test my samples. Since I started my work decades ago, I have tried to, but no one is willing to. My own colleagues accused me of bringing us backwards, of slighting our evolution. Some have even called me Dr. Frankenstein and said that such an experiment would kill a human. She scratched her head and focused her eyes on me. But you are immortal. I can test on you and accelerate the process so you can experience centuries worth of evolution within a few weeks. It will be uncomfortable, probably even agonizing, but it's a risk that must be taken. You are already dying anyway.
I walked to the machine and laid a hand on it. It was cold, smooth to the touch, but it emanated heat the longer I kept my hand on it. And bubbles of color surged as I played on the surface, swiping my hand to and fro. She was right. There was death, another kind of death, and potentially life, but at a cost. However, I'd been living with cost since the 23rd century. This was nothing new. So, what are our next steps? Is this about saving me, or is this about saving the human species? A long, brooding pause stretched for her, but passed in a wink of an eye for me. She swayed for a moment, and she clenched her fists. The swaying stopped, and she started speaking.
Both. You, because you are a unique specimen. It pains me to see anybody dying from something that can be fixed. I believe I can fix your feeding problem. As for the human species, if this works, you will be truly immortal, better than any of our species. You will be my perfect creation. The human species can go screw itself, she said quietly. I gave it plenty of opportunity to become better, and it has refused to see the light. I choose to help you over my species.
I stared bewildered at her. I had rarely seen humans with that level of detachment. Why help me reach immortality when you could have augmented yourself or done a conscience transplant and avoided death? Dr. Farkas blunted her feet apart and commenced a retort, but she started coughing, racking coughs that bent her elongated back. But once she stopped, she resumed her position.
A very pertinent question, but I don't want to answer it now. You will find out. For now, all you need to know is that I will work on combining the genomes I have, and then I will need you to come in so I can start the infusion process to make you capable of having proper nourishment again.
She waved her hand and the lights in the chamber turned off.
What is your name?
Adulum.
Just Adulum?
She nodded.
I am Barbala Farkas.
Another silence hummed loudly as we walked towards the front door. I guess we have a deal? I hazarded, stretching out my palm and fingers to conclude the agreement. She stretched out hers, her fingers covering my whole hand. The human hand size was definitely a new human trait I hadn't gotten used to yet.
Yes, let us start our journey to conquer death.
She laughed, and she ushered me out of her pod. Weeks passed in a flurry of DNA analysis and isolation sessions with Dr. Farkas, publicized announcements of random deaths occurring across the world from ACT upgrade failures, and a growing sense of hope for Dr. Farkas and me. Some sessions we would spend without saying a word. I would just stand there while she waved a wand-like object around me, and her machine would register my DNA and transform it into code she could visualize and work with. She used the genome editing system that she patented during her research to test the reactions of my DNA to her samples. She tried explaining how the idea was influenced by the CRISPR-Cas9 system of the 21st century, but groundbreaking innovation had made it more efficient and reliable. Other sessions, we would talk about the possible future of mankind. Every so often, she let me feed from her, just a tiny bit, enough to revive me, but not so much as to kill her outright. She had leukemia, and she was getting more and more transfusions, but her doctor warned her that she was running out of real blood. Because there was no need for blood anymore, there was no reason to artificially make it, much less keep actual quantities of it. After those transfusions, she would stare stonily ahead, and silent tears would pool in her eyes. One session, I asked Dr. Farkas a question about the past. Her past. Why, with all the options available out there, are you basically choosing to die? I haven't heard of anyone dying from cancer anymore unless there's a breakdown in their tech. Even so, there are ways to strip the cancer away and heal you. So, why? Dr. Farkas swallowed. She grimaced and paused her work over a table as long as our room.
At the age of 18, the year you choose to be conscience transplanted or not, I decided not to be. I did not want to be a machine. I did not even want augmentations. I grieve for the children now who are forced to be conscience transplanted by their families before they can even enjoy their organic body.
Dr. Farkas hugged herself. She was thinner, almost bony. Her breathing was louder than usual. I expected her to faint, but she held herself together. Her eyes burned with unshed tears.
I did not choose to die. What people are doing now, conscience transplanting themselves into these bodies, is death. Taking unnecessary risks. We are not supposed to physically live for centuries. It is unnatural. It is a drain on the planet.
I raised an eyebrow at her, and she scoffingly said,
You are different. You are turned. You have a different role in this ecosystem, but you are a natural part of it. Now, stand still.
She waggled her fingers in the air, and a massive panel shimmered into existence. A timeline stretched out across it, and the beginning portion turned green. She took out a series of tablets from the wall and started sliding them into slots in the arrowhead machine, as I liked to call it. She called it the Fusioner. Once she had inserted about 24 tablets with modified DNA sequences, she turned to me and activated another screen. This one was right above me, and as I watched, it showed my genetic makeup, my blood type, my traits, and then codes showed up, code after code I could not understand. Judging from Dr. Farkas's expression, she could understand them perfectly. Once the screen had finished spewing its information, Dr. Farkas pressed both hands to her temples, and her eyes took on the same hue as the screen. She waved me into the machine. This would be my first time entering it. It opened, and I stepped inside. Nothing but white surrounded me, and I touched the 2 blank walls. They were soft, like foam. The roof of the machine was beyond my reach. My strange scientist friend's voice echoed around me.
Stand tall and try not to move. Nanobots are going to appear out of the ceiling and will crawl into your skin and inside your body to start modifying and editing your genome, integrating it with the ones I've coded into the machine. It might hurt. I don't know. No one has ever had such an experience.
So I stood still and closed my eyes. Soon enough, prickling sensations erupted all over my body and then gradually worked their way inside of me. After a while, I could not feel anything. Then division started. Flashes of memories, flashes of long-forgotten sensations pounding through my head, flashes of roaming in the wild when there were still trees and greenery on the planet, hunting animals many times my size, sweat trickling down my brow, my teeth tearing into thick, raw meat. Soon, flash after flash darted through me, and it took all my concentration to stand still and not bend from the onslaught. Overwhelming fear of bigger predators, awe at the knowledge I could make weapons, incredulity at the big world out there, of mystical beings that controlled the world. I forced myself to focus on the hope of immortality, of bloodlust, of superiority of species. I hadn't felt emotions that weren't predatory in too long. That wasn't Adullam. When we were done, and Dr. Farkas took me out of the Fusioner, I could barely keep my mind straight. Out of habit, I sought out her neck to reopen the bite I had left from previous sessions, but she had to guide my head and hold it as I sucked, desperately but carefully. I sucked for exactly 6.7 seconds. just enough to satisfy some of my hunger, just enough not to kill her. She was tastier than usual, more fragrant. She must have had a transfusion. The usual sickliness of her blood had some extra punch. After I released her, and I'd made sure to lap up any excess drop of blood that remained on her skin and mine, her hungry gaze met mine.
Efficiency. Don't waste any of it. You and I are more similar than you think.
Her voice was curiously natural despite the lust in her eyes. I knew she hadn't had any man touch her since her failed marriage 2 decades prior. I also knew she wanted to be a predator just like me, but she didn't want to get her hands dirty. Ironic that she would die while I carried on her legacy. The 4th month of our endeavor, Dr. Farkas was sitting in the experiment chamber on the floor, drinking synthetic coffee. I, of course, ate and drank nothing. She sipped on her cup, and as she did, my heart sank at her bruised, shaking wrists, her increasingly skeletal face, and the scent of decay I could sense in her ever-weakening blood. But the ferocity in her eyes matched the degree of physical weakness that was destroying her body. The blue in her eyes darkened as she contemplated me.
Do you sense any change in you since we started this?
Some. I feel better. The pain is less. My instincts are less slow. They are strengthening back to how they used to be. But I still feel the hunger.
That's because I'm not done giving you the last 3 centuries worth of DNA. Once that's done, you should start feeling a major difference. In a few months' time, you should be able to get on a ship and survive, and be able to drink the artificial blood from the ACTs. I have chosen to give you recent traits that will help you settle in the biggest settlements they expect to have on Dragur.
I nodded, but inside I fretted. She seemed so sure that it would work. She didn't even conceive of failure. But what choice did we have? I was desperate. She was desperate. We were both on ticking clocks that grew louder with each passing day. The true question was, would she die first, or would I? I didn't know if it was worth asking her if she had a backup plan. In the end, the death of one would entail the death of the other.
Adelim, what was it like, being turned?
She asked, still sipping her coffee. Unlike anything you will ever feel, I said haltingly after a long break. I had never had to think about how it felt to become a vampire. I became one, and then I had to survive. I rarely thought about my days or lingered on the past. It was a waste of time. But I could try to answer Dr. Farkas's question. It is supremely painful, awkward and orgasmic at the same time. It takes time to grow used to new powers you never had. Being so powerful the first few centuries was intoxicating once I learned what I could do. I lived for draining the next person dry. Immortality was worth it. I could travel. I could live under different names and identities whenever I wanted. I was better as a vampire than I had ever been as a human. I became assertive, strong, sensual, fast and permanently healthy. As a vampire, I became superior. Dr. Farkas finished her coffee and licked her lips, pushing her head back against the wall behind her and folding her hands together.
Did you ever fall in love?
She asked. No. I gazed at her in consternation. Never. She frowned. She cracked one eye open.
I don't believe you. Vampires always find love in the stories.
I threw my hands up in the air. No, sorry to disappoint. Your knowledge of vampires is nothing but fairy tales. We are predators, not lovers. We find sexual pleasure, but not even that is as pleasing as drinking blood. Falling in love with a human would be pointless. You do not fall in love with your food. Besides, even if you could look past that elementary fact, why fall in love when that person will die in 100 years or less?
True. It is a waste of time. Come to think of it, we don't benefit much from love either.
She set her mouth. She took a few deep breaths, and she coughed hard, phlegm rattling so hard I could have heard it even without my preternatural hearing. Why do you persist in helping a vampire? I am a predator that feeds on your race. Why would you help me kill your race? I had asked that question multiple times. I wondered if her answer would remain the same. Humans were fickle. Dr. Farkas stood up and marched to the fusioner, taking out the empty tablet and smoothing it over with her hands.
Adelim, my species has a cancer. We killed our own planet. We are going to go to new planets and eventually destroy them too. You are a check on our greed and appetite.
She smiled ruefully and placed the tablet back in its slot in the wall. She moved slowly, deliberately.
I know you probably won't wipe us out. There are so many of us. But you can cull the population a little once you're able to feed on artificial blood. Remember, you are supposed to be my masterpiece and become something better than my species with all its foolishness and fancy tech.
I seriously wondered in that moment if she was a genius or if she was a psychopath.
Human race needs culling. People turn on each other. It's the way they are. Even your own children turn on you.
Her face became frigid, and I looked down. She stiffened and her eyes glazed. A dull thrum billowed from her, and she remained in that pose for a few minutes. When her eyes cleared, she fiddled with the earbuds in her ears and motioned for me to listen. A bubbly voice suddenly broke the silence.
This is WWW News with more information about the upcoming exodus from Earth. In T-131, 400 minutes, the first settlements of ships will go to the Proxima Centauri b, HR 2562b, and Draugr planets. The best groups of scientists will be traveling with you to ensure you encounter no unfortunate side effects with your artificial bodies and conscience transplants. Ships will be fully transparent to give you full views of space as you go on your journey. They will also have slow mode to increase the experience of travel. You can expect nothing but the best amenities, food simulators, music connectors so music can be shared through the brain connection, toilet simulators, large beds so you can power down in your brains and recharge your bodies. Compartment space will be expansive to allow for your condensed home packages to travel with you safely.
Sounds more like advertisement than news, I said, but was cut off as another message came through Dr. Farkas's brain phone.
Make sure your augmented artificial conscience transplanted body, ACT, is compatible with the planet you have decided to spend your life on. If you are unsure, get your ACT body tested at your nearest lab. Also, get tested for software upgrade failure. The death toll is increasing every day. Possible correlation might be involved.
I didn't think more of it. Humans died all the time, but Dr. Farkas's lips drew tightly together. Meanwhile, Dr. Farkas finalized her sessions with me. She worked frantically but precisely. She finally finished her injections on me, and for the last few I had to stay in her home and sleep on the floor in the chamber. My body swam from so much genetic memory. My features started changing bit by bit. My eyes became larger, as big as golf balls. My body stretched as my limbs lengthened. I lay in agony on the floor as the bones and cartilage stretched. I could suddenly tune in to the technology around me and hear conversations from around the world through the interweb. I knew facts from any random thing I thought of if I concentrated hard enough. The world itself felt stark and full of tiny details I could process all at once. If I wasn't careful, people's emotions and voices started leaking through the interweb and I would start responding. Dr. Farkas's voice, now when she put me in the fusioner, would echo in my head as opposed to the room. Her frustration, her doggedness, trailed with me when afterwards I went hunting to train my new body. I had to adjust my pacing, my stealthing method in my killing stroke now. I had killed an elderly woman and a teenager with some difficulty. Their thoughts had almost given me away. Their blood had left me with a semi-satiated feeling, which was a small victory. Now I trailed a young couple on their way to a boat ride on the Danube. They held hands and laughed as I stayed in the shadows, though the shadows were starting to repel me. I did not like this new adaptation. Vampires relied on shadow to cloak them. I crawled out of the shadows and activated my super speed, focusing on every inch of my body and factoring in the air and space around me. But I forgot that I was taller and bulkier than I used to be. The air folded around me wrongly, and when I reappeared, I appeared right on top of the couple. They squealed as I squashed them and sent them tumbling into the river. Fighting the current was like swimming in air. My limbs powered through the water effortlessly. I easily found the man first. I caught him and squeezed his head until I crushed his brain storage unit. He wouldn't be able to send any messages for help. I opened my mouth and attempted to pierce his neck, but the skin of his body was too tough, and it sent a dull pain up my fangs. I would have to slash him open and use the water as cover, but not lose the blood. I willed the water away from his neck, and I peeled it open, sinking my teeth into his jugular. I drank hesitantly, bracing myself for the tang of gross artificial blood. But it tasted effervescent, like bubbles in champagne. I drank faster and harder, and his limbs never had time to even twitch. I let go of his corpse and rushed after the woman who was floating downstream. Her panicked eyes met mine, and I quickly crushed her brain storage unit too. I ripped open her neck and drained her too, my mouth frantically digging into her jugular. Somewhere in the feeding I gagged, and I realized I was overstuffing myself. But the bloodlust fueled my body, and I couldn't stop. I was coughing up her artificial blood and reveling in the taste, and drinking more and coughing up more. When I was done, her corpse also floated gently away. Her husband had fully fed me. She had been for naught. The muck of the Danube soon hid her from sight, and I emerged from the water, sorrowfully putting 2 notches on the ring I now wore around my neck. It did not fit anymore. I reported to Dr. Farkas the day after, too ashamed to look her in the eye. I still felt queasy from the overfeeding. When I'd finished, she smiled and said,
"It looks like the treatments are working. Hurrah!"
She threw her head back, and as she did, the wounds on her neck opened. I smelled their blood, and it smelled of rot, of mold, of every putrid thing in the world rolled into one. I almost vomited. She noticed, and she approached me, baring her neck for me. I stepped away from her.
"It is truly working. When word of this gets out..."
I interrupted her. "Remember at the very beginning, when we first started talking about this deal we have? I said I could influence people's minds and have them celebrate your research. I can still do that. All you have to do is ask." A flash of relief lit up her face, but was replaced by a scowl.
"No, I don't want you to. A few years ago, maybe, but not anymore. My research has proven more effective than even I thought. I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need any fame. My legacy will live on through you."
I was about to interject, saying that creating me as her twisted masterpiece of revenge and justice on her species wasn't really a good aspect of the bargain for her, in my opinion. But we winced as simultaneously her brain phone went off and my interweb connection flared.
Cancellations en masse of space exodus are occurring due to increase of sudden deaths. They happen in large groups of random populations at the same time. Today, 10 million people succumb to this strange disease. No symptoms have been observed. However, digital autopsies reveal that the deaths are probably due to malfunctioning of the ACT's brain storage. Currently, it is unknown how widespread this problem is or for how long it will continue. Again, we strongly encourage anyone with an ACT to go to the nearest lab and have your software upgrade checked, even if you are not feeling symptoms.
The interweb clicked off. Dr. Farkas snorted, then sighed.
I knew it. I always knew it. Throwing away everything organic and placing our conscience into a machine was begging for trouble. We are reaping what we sowed. Mark my words, this will be catastrophic. We need to hurry. We may have even less time than we think.
Her jaw set, and that fire burned in her gaze. I truly hoped she was dead wrong. Dr. Farkas was right. The malfunctioning of the ACT's brain storage became an epidemic. By the end of that week, a quarter of the Earth's population had died. Nothing could be done. People were scrambling to change their ACTs, but there were no guarantees about the new ACTs, and many died from the attempted transfer from one to the other. At one point, I was in the fusioner, and I heard Dr. Farkas's voice and another voice talk to each other.
They tested me, Mom. I tested positive for software failure. It could happen any day now. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for treating you the way I did.
Get out. The only reason you're apologizing is because you're dying. Where have you been since I've been dying? You haven't even come to see me.
I tried pushing away Dr. Farkas's anger, but it was useless. My vampiric telepathy and my new adaptations made it hard to disassociate.
I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have cast you away. It's not an excuse, but there's been a lot going on.
Too much to see your mom? Dr. Farkas said flatly.
It's not just that. I didn't want to deal with your weird theories and experiments. You see people as numbers and statistics. You're a people user, Mom. You always have been. But I should have accepted that instead of...
You are a user, Meredith. You took and took and took while your useless dad ran off and left us alone. I raised you, counseled you, educated you all by myself. I do see the world differently from you. It's how I have survived for so long.
Yet, you refuse to get a conscience transplant?
Dr. Farkas raised her voice.
I did what I could for you. And what did you give back? Silent treatment, years without calling, talking bad about me to anyone who asked.
You've mentioned some pretty unethical stuff, Mom, about...
I don't have time for this. I'm not getting lectured by anybody today. I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. I'm sorry you're dying. Oh well, death is a lonely process. Death leaves behind loneliness. You're finally learning that lesson.
The voices stopped. When I exited the fusioner, I asked Dr. Farkas if she was okay. There were no tears. She said,
I am perfectly fine.
Death is lonely? You're hardly lonely. I'm helping you out. I'm your instrument of justice, I said, bewildered.
Who's the idealist now? She smiled thinly. Yes, you're helping me. But in the end, I'll be dying alone while you become immortal. The pain will claim me. My body will feel. A body I worked so hard to keep sacred. It won't matter because it will die and rot and my conscience will be lost.
I wish I could help more, I said.
You can't. Move on. Now, let me see how your body is adjusting.
I continued to change, my nose becoming 2 tiny holes in my face. No need for smell on the planet I would be on. My teeth became two long, thin needles to pierce into the ACTs. My skin tone became a dull gray and hardened so I could camouflage myself with the other humans. Dr. Farkas claimed that the final step was brushing all the DNA together in one last sweep in the fusioner. This, she said, would be the most painful and risky part. The day was now, and delaying would serve no purpose, so I groggily said, "Yes, let's do it." I picked myself up from the cold, hard floor and walked unsteadily into the fusioner. I heard the multiple clicks of tablets being slid into all the outer slots of the machine. I focused on my own body and my identity. I was Adlam, a vampire about to become truly immortal, if everything worked as it should. I refused to think about the possibility of failure, or worse, that there would be no one to feed on if more humans succumbed to the ACT defect. Dr. Farkas's voice trickled to the interweb.
I was thinking, if the process goes through smoothly for you, then I could become immortal after all. You could turn me, and I would survive any adaptation. All I'd have to do is put your DNA, which is comprised of your original vampiric one, and all the other human DNA I've transfused in you, in me.
Oh no, Dr. Farkas, you do not want to be what I am. You never had a chance to be a normal vampire. That was frightening in itself. To become the hybrid I am now would be too much for you.
You think I can't handle it?
She snapped. No, being a vampire is monstrous.
I know that,
she yelled directly into my brain.
Do you?
I thought back at her.
Yes, I know you kill people. I know how you kill them. I know how you will kill them after the brushing process.
It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it.
The possibility of immortality is here, Adelim, for me and for you. I don't see why I should cheat myself out of that now that it's a possibility.
That is preferable to the life I lead. I wasn't given a choice. Besides, the process itself might kill you.
But you took another chance at immortality when we started working together. You didn't want to die any more than I did. Don't be a hypocrite. Leaving a legacy would have been all right, but now knowing that you will become the perfect immortal killing instrument and can turn me, I won't have to die. I can become another natural part of the ecosystem without violating my body.
I thought you said death was natural. You're being a hypocrite too. She tuned me out and yelled,
"The brushing process is beginning."
A light pulsed its way into existence around me, slowly flaring to a brightness that would have destroyed a normal human being's eyes. Filaments and clouds of dark matter popped out of the light, flexed and bent around my body, massaging my every limb in ways that left me feeling emptier yet fuller than I had ever been. It squeezed me horizontally and vertically, and a prickling started from my toes first, then from my head, and worked its way toward the middle. The prickling became a pain like that of one being skinned. I knew the sensation. I had fallen on remote populations in Australia once in my early travels, and suffered through part of their torture before I came into full control of my vampire powers. I wanted to mentally reach out to Dr. Farkas and ask what she was doing, but I couldn't think clearly. I tried to rein in the panic, but it spread inside of me as surely as this light that was melting my eyes. A crack like broken glass echoed loudly, and a piercing shriek surged and peaked. A blast erupted around me, and my body cracked apart like an egg. My innards shook, waving out into nothingness. I had died. My body was no more. Yet I could think better than before. A bubble of darkness wrapped around me, and I reached out with my mind. The bubble expanded and expanded until I stopped to analyze what I was feeling. Stardust, atoms of every living and non-living thing in the cosmos, each as precise and clear as a strand of hair, all wriggling in me. It was me. I was this nebulous cloud of elements. The dying, carbon-choked atmosphere of the earth was also me, and the emptiness of the stars throbbing all around me. A new feeling wiggled its way outward, and a clinical, odd, familiar sensation burgeoned into being. A woman I knew well. Her wonder at the world around her. Her insatiable romanticization of vampires from memories brought down from generations and generations of over-avid storytellers. Her disgust at the useless deaths of the human race and the destruction of the earth. Anger at her daughter and former husband. Scorn at the nature of the human race. But she was not dying. That acrid, weak scent of her was gone. Dr. Farkas, I thought, and her thought connected immediately.
Adelam, an accident happened. Terrible. I'm not sure what happened.
Terror and marvel trembled. Hers. Are we dead? Are we alive? Her thought probed its way across the cosmos and inward. I bobbed along gently, focusing my awareness on the earth. More humans were dying from the software upgrade defect. Their life essence switched off as if cut by a blade in swaths. At this rate, there would be no more humans left, besides the paltry thousands that had been chosen not to have their consciences transplanted. Dr. Farkas's awareness was pulled by mine, and it said,
"We are celestial. We are everything."
Tiny, stabbing sensations flew past us, and her awareness latched onto one. She absorbed it, and a new awareness sprouted into being. Memories completely alien to me, yet as it became us, it was as if they had always been a part of us. A human conscience, full of rigid beliefs and small gaps of a childlike mind that had been begging for release for years. More. Those tiny stabs hurled out, and we latched on to as many as we could. Souvenirs, thought processes, visual echoes, compressed and squished into one big cloud. The Earth's humans winked out and were born again with us, as us, like us. They were us. Dr. Farkas's anger, cold efficiency, and rage at death was gone. My individuality, my predatory nature had disappeared. Humans needed to be killed, yes. Humans would never change. Humans were food. Humans betrayed each other, but we were all becoming one. We could all together become a better species. Collective power was uniting. No need for superiority anymore. Everyone was invincible. Vampirism was weak. Had always been. There was no power in one. Which thoughts were mine? Which one were Borbala's? Which ones were the humans we were saving? I could not tell. If Dr. Farkas could have laughed, she would have. Her awareness glowed incandescent with triumph. Our awarenesses hummed with power. We all thought, we are all immortal. The human race is no more. Now, a new one begins. One that surpassed any physical constraint or body, any boundary of time. We were the species of everything for all time.
You've been listening to Full Integration by Sophie Jupillat Posey, read by Delio Pera.
So there you go. That was the end of Full Integration, and I hope you liked and enjoyed it. So this story, the inspiration behind this story came about 1.5 years ago. My husband and I were having a philosophical discussion about life and death, as well as trends in literary genres. My husband in particular loves vampires, and he believes that with the amount of vampire lit coming out in this decade, obviously vampire lit is making a comeback, and we were discussing like how they would be represented, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and all of that. And while he was talking, I was suddenly struck by the concept that what would happen if vampires didn't keep up with human evolution? What if they couldn't find any blood whatsoever to feed on in the future because humans had evolved way beyond their scope? And since vampires, in most stories, kind of stay at the point where they were when they were turned, that would be quite a big problem. So that idea kind of just festered in my head, and I wrote down a little blurb about my idea in a Google Drive doc and let it sit for a while. And then I started writing it, and the characters, Adelam and Dr. Farkas came really easily in my head, but trying to craft a story, a short self-contained story that made sense and the pacing was right and included all the themes I wanted to incorporate in it was quite challenging and difficult. I went through quite a few drafts trying to perfect the story, and I eventually did. So at the end of the day, I was super proud of writing the story and the way it turned out. But I kept getting rejections from multiple magazines about it. But I kept submitting it, and then I fell on Aditya, who was looking for sci-fi stories for his anthology, and he seemed to really enjoy it and was blown away by the concept. So that was really awesome, and yeah, he had great things to say about it. So as I mentioned earlier, I believe having worked with Delio in the past, I asked him to narrate the story, and he did amazing. He did a good job rendering the mood of a story, getting the characters' voices across authentically, and I'm very happy with the end product, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. So enough about me. Now I'm going to talk about Del, who's a really amazing person who deserves all the support. He is not just a narrator, but he's also a writer. So I asked him a few questions about those two things that he loves so much. So I asked him how he started narrating, and he said, I started reading the Warhammer 40,000K stories that are being put out weekly towards the end of last year. Why did I start that? I have no clue. I really can't remember what made me give it a go. I think it was because I'd been getting into the Warhammer universe for a couple months and had been watching a lot of lore videos, which are a lot of someone reading a wiki article and adding their own thoughts and knowledge in. Many of the voices I heard were challenging to listen to, and I thought, well, I've been told I have a decent voice. I'll see what I can do. So then I asked Delio what his first narration job was, professional narration job, and he said, my first job was VC. Haha, seriously, I had no idea that ACX was even a thing until a friend of my brother told me about it. When my brother heard I was doing the 40,000K readings, he got me in touch with a guy that does book narration for a living. We had a chat, and he told me about ACX. It took a few weeks to find a book that didn't hurt my brain to look at, and that was The Sea. So then I asked him, well, what would your dream narration job be? And he said, that's an interesting question. Narration isn't my first love. I'm cool with it, and I enjoy it to a degree, but writing is my thing. I've been taking it quite seriously for the past 2 to 3 years. Before that, I would just do it here and there. Now it's a thing I do almost every day. In a month, I might not write 1 or 2 days, and those days I feel like complete garbage, physically. But I suppose if I had a gun to my head, my answer would be my own work. The things I can do with narration are quite different than writing. I can really stress parts that I want emphasized. I can make a character sound exactly like I want, to the best of my ability. I can slow down parts and speed up others depending on what's happening. So I'm looking forward to reading after summer and putting that online. So then I asked Delio what is his process for finding the right voice to narrate certain characters. And he said, if the writing is good enough, that work is pretty much done for me. But in terms of how the voice actually sounds, I just go with the first or second thing that comes to mind. I assume there's a subconscious process that happens. Maybe seeing what the character says and their name informs how they sound. But I don't spend much time on that at all. Once the first character has a voice, I try and make the next be different enough that the listener can hear and see who is speaking without needing to be told this is Bob and this is Susan. You still get that in writing with all the Susan says and Bob says, but I hope you're able to hear that before those words reach your ears. Then I asked Delio what was his favorite narration project, and he said, I think my work on your story, Full Integration, was some of my better stuff. Being that there was only 2 characters helped a ton. I could really focus on making them really stand out as unique individuals. So then I asked him, well, what is your favorite writing project? And he said, I'm thrilled with my winning entry to a recent 40,000K contest, but it's my Wake of Tom universe that I really love working on. After Summer is the first book in that universe, and one I spent more than 7 years working on. The major theme of that book deals with what we become when we die. There's a quote in the last episode of Westworld Season 1 that I like to use when talking about that story. Ford says that Mozart and Chopin never died, they became their music. And I think that's 100% true. And yet the world will only ever know one Mozart, one Chopin, one Jobs, Musk, etc. But we'll all become something when we die, even those of us that don't lead lives that alter the world. And that's what my book focuses on, the people that were lost to time, yet still became something, things we might never realize. My hope with After Summer is that as someone is reading it, they don't get it at first, but then near the midpoint they start to understand the connections. Then by 2/3 or 3/4 in you should feel stuck, trapped, almost anxious. You should see where things are headed and not want it to happen, yet embrace the fall that you find yourself in. If I did my part well enough, the reader will get a feeling that is both strange, anxiety-inducing, yet peaceful too, like experiencing a small death. If even one person gets that feeling, I'd be over the moon. So those are the end of the questions I had for Del. And I can say that I'm currently reading his book After Summer, and it is really good stuff. I definitely understand what he was trying to do with a disorientation feeling for sure. But it's really well written, and I can't wait to finish reading it and give him feedback on it. Anyway, so please make sure to check out his YouTube channel and his website. Like I said before, he is pretty amazing and could definitely use the support. So, as we near the end of this, I just want to remind you guys to subscribe to our channels and follow us. If you're already doing so, then thank you for the support. And yeah, thank you for listening. Stay healthy and stay safe. Bye-bye.